Okay, so welcome to the third part of the Selectors section of the CSS tutorial series. In this part of the tutorial, we're going to be taking a quick look at something that I probably should have mentioned earlier, but didn't. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of just this here, and inside primary I'm going to remove that. So all we're left with is a div with a class of article. Now, one thing I didn't mention is selecting an element by its class name. Now, you might think, well, we have looked at selecting elements by a class name. Nope, we've looked at selecting general classes and general IDs. What we need to do is we need to select classes perhaps that have a specific type. So for example, div class equals article. Remember, it's a class. I can apply this to absolutely any other element. So I could go ahead and I could apply this to a paragraph element. Let's do that now. Okay, so I'm going to just write some text, and in here I'll write the same thing, some text. So now we've got a div with a class of article, but we've also got a paragraph with a class of article as well. Let's refresh. There we go. Two things, two bits of text as we'd expect. Okay, so let's go ahead and just change this to div. Change this to paragraph. I know it's obvious which one's which, but it makes it a lot easier to see what we're doing. Okay, so we have got a div and a paragraph. Now we want to select the article class. What would we do? We would do dot class, and we would say color. Let's pick something different, green. Okay, so when we refresh, okay, that's not worked. Oh, sorry, it's article. When we go ahead and refresh, these turn green because they both hold the same class. Now what happens if I only want paragraphs with the class of article to be green? Unlikely in a real world scenario, but you know, just my example. Now what I can do is I can use an element type specifier, but I can attach a class to this, and that will basically mean, say, any paragraphs with the element of article. That would ignore, say, any divs with the class of article. And the way to do this is to do the element type, so for example p, and dot, and then the class, or hash and then the class, even if you were using IDs, but there's no space anywhere at all. It's just p.article, and this essentially reads from front to back p with the class of article. Okay, that's essentially it. So now what's going to happen, as you could expect, this div is not styled, but the paragraph is. Okay, so that's just another way of selecting. It might not seem useful now, but when you need to go ahead and add more flexibility and more distinction in your styles, that's where that comes in. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at now is something that's a bit more, I certainly find it a bit more boring, but it's something that you really, is really quite helpful at some points, and it, again, avoids you adding unnecessary classes and stuff like that. And that is the attribute selectors. Now, what is an attribute? Well, let's first of all take a look at something that contains an attribute, which is an anchor. An input also will take an attribute as well, and by attribute I mean these here, so href and type. Without the attributes, they would just be nothing really. These elements, unlike things like paragraphs, divs, actually require some kind of attribute to be applied to them. Even class equals something is an attribute. Okay, so href equals, you'd expect to find a link here, so for example www.google.com, Google, an input type of, say, text, and you would expect to type some text in here. So let's refresh. You can see we've got a link to Google and we've got an input field here. So two plain elements on the page. Now how do we target these specifically? Well, I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate this link down, and I'm going to go ahead and say let's say PHP Academy, and let's go ahead and change the URL as well, which is important. Okay, so these have two different hrefs. Now what happens if I want to say, again, an unlikely example, but something that is going to show you the use of this. Let's say I want to target all anchor elements, say links, that have the link google.com, or google.co.uk or whatever, phpacademy.org, it doesn't matter. We can specify this in the CSS. So what I'm going to have a go at doing is I'm going to colour Google in a different colour to any other link on the page. So we could even go and just duplicate this down again. I think it's just going to give a better example. And we'll just say localhost. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to style Google different from the rest of the links. So how do we do this? Well, we could of course say class equals Google or class equals green or something, you know, but this is unnecessary. We're not going to touch a thing on this markup to style this color. We are going to select any anchor tag with this link here. So how do we go about doing that? Well, it's easy. We're going to say A, and then we're going to use these square brackets, and inside we're going to specify first of all the attribute and then second of all the value. So I'm going to say href equals, so it's looking a bit odd now, you know, some that you might not have seen before, but we can say ahref equals, and then we can specify a value that we want it to equal. So here we've got google.com. We can then go ahead and create our styles. So I'm going to say color green. So what we've now done is we've selected any A tag or any anchor element with the href, i.e. the link that the link links to, that has this value here, google.com, which this one does. So these stars will be applied to that. So again, when we refresh, we get the change. Now you might not think this is useful, but you have to remember that there are other, you know, elements that hold different attributes, and again, we're trying to keep all of our styles completely separate to our markup, and here we've done that. You know, we've done this. Okay, so we've looked at that. Now that's just a brief example. We can do the same with the input type of text. So, you know, for example, we go input because the element is an input element, and we say type equals text. Okay, so where anything has an attribute, doesn't matter what it is, you can go and style that. Now you may see more advanced selectors, particularly in CSS3 as well. I'm not going to go into them because I don't really think they're relevant when you're beginning CSS. You can go ahead over to the a W3C specification and look them up. There's plenty of them which you may or may not use. I think it's probably something that you'd use when you were more comfortable with CSS, but there we go. Things like this, which mean if it contains a specific, you know, word, we can look at that in a minute. That's absolutely fine. But for example, I might say input type equals text, color green. When I type something in here, this color is green. So again, we're not adding any class to this input. We're just, you know, we're keeping everything basic. Then again, we could just style all inputs. Okay, so you know, it's getting a bit more flexible now that we know how. Okay, so well, we'll quickly go ahead and look at that more advanced selector. I'll go ahead and I'll say ahref. No, we'll create an image because that's more appropriate example for this. So we could say image source equals something, pop an image on our page, alt equals, I'll just say write my name out. What I could do is I could say create another image, pop it down there, and I could say video go. Now I've got two images on my page, both of which have no existence. I can obviously style up an image as I want, so I could say image border 1 pixel solid and black, and that will place black borders around images. Now what do I want to do? Well, I want to target any image that has the alt that contains Alex, and this is say a space separated value. What I can do is I can say image where the alt this sort of weird character here, I'm not sure what it's called, Alex. And with this I can say border 1 pixel solid there. So I'm not really going to get too much into these types of selectors. There's lots of different ones, more in CSS3, you know, that are really, really good and really, really powerful. But if you're just starting out in CSS, there's a lot more else you should be focusing on. So yeah, what this is going to do is it's going to select anything that contains Alex that has list separation with spaces, so that wouldn't work, for example. So when I refresh, you see that one of these images has a border, one of them doesn't. This one, funnily enough, is the one with Alex. Again, like I said, if this didn't have a space in there and I refreshed, it wouldn't style it because it needs to be space separated. These are not useless, but in CSS3 you get a lot better support for this, searching through things like that, and it's really cool examples, so check it out if you're interested in this, even though it's boring, but there we go. Okay, so that's it for this part of the tutorial. In the last part, we'll look at some pseudo classes, explain what they are, things like something a bit more advanced, user actions. They're not actual things; they don't exist if that's what you like. But we'll get into all that in the last part. So I'll see you in the next part of the tutorial.